So we're very, very excited today for another episode of Sundays with 200 Million Artisans. I'm very happy to welcome you all. We are live on Instagram and on Facebook along with Zoom as well. This is season 4 and it is titled, Does It Matter Real? Because we are talking about different materials with every different episode. And this is a collaboration between 200 Million Artisans and Unplugged Talks. Just before we get into our chat this evening, I'm just going to quickly introduce you to the people behind this. Of course, 200 Million Artisans is a volunteer-run COVID-19 response platform that supports India's artisans and artisan producers. They assist verified craft-based organizations by featuring fundraisers and initiatives that can be publicly supported. They also drive innovative collaborations to help India's artisans and craft communities. Please do check them out on social media and their website for more details on what they are doing and how you can be a part of it. 200 Million Artisans invited Unplugged Talks, which is a virtual platform that provides an opportunity for public engagement with creative minds from across international cultural landscapes. Insightful and candid conversations about personal journeys, explorations, experiences, and anecdotes. These allow us to demystify the illustrious image associated with creative masters and encourages a deeper understanding of their vision. This repository of lesser documented narratives, we hope will feed into a larger idea of a realistic ecosystem, which is relevant to the 21st century post-carbon society. We do imagine a platform free from marketplace heroics, one which is open to critical public participation. The Unplugged Talks is initiating an environment of a collective and ethical cultural evolution. It is an initiative by Matra Architects and is co-curated by Virendra Vaklu and myself, Mrinalini. Today, we are joined by none other than the founder of Varnam, Karthik Vaidyanathan. Before we start, I'd like to tell everybody a little bit about Varnam and what Varnam is. It's called the Varnam Craft Collective, which is a multi-award-winning social enterprise that has been working with artisans in Channapatna for over 8 years. The result is a series of designs interpreting this 200-year-old toy-making craft in the home and lifestyle space that includes lighting, kitchens, dining, and bar accessories, kids' room, decor, toys, and jewelry. An example right here. In an industry where more than 90% of the artisans are men, many of Varnam's creations have been deftly handcrafted by women artisans. Varnam has been providing sustainable livelihoods on a consistent basis to artisan groups. Proceeds from sales of Varnam are also invested in training women artisans who wish to learn this craft. I'm not going to say much more here because I really would like to introduce Karthik and ask him to tell us about Varnam, what they're doing, how they reached here, and what his journey has been. So first of all, a very, very warm welcome, Karthik. We're so happy to have you and grateful for you to take out your Sunday afternoon, evening, to join us today.
Hi, Mrinali. Thanks for having me. And I'm very happy to be here and have this talk.
Great. So Karthik, I know you've had an unusual sort of journey. If I can take the liberty of saying so right from the get-go, you are not a trained designer.
Yes.
However, what is really interesting is that your journey could actually be could resound with a lot of people over here. It's not that uncommon, where you've come from a traditional sort of background family that expected you to, get into engineering like most Indian parents would and get degree after degree and become some sort of, great professional. Yeah. And you followed that path for a bit, but then you steered off. So tell us how this whole thing began for you. How did you come about doing what you do today?
Right. So Varnam has actually been the result of 22 years of working in the corporate sector. I come from a South Indian Tamilian family, very patriarchal, and there was no say in the matter. I did my computer engineering because that was the in thing to do in the 90s. But I wasn't interested in start doing computers. So then I said I would do an MBA. So I did my management studies and marketing. And I joined a computer firm I worked there for 6 months, and then by that time, you have a voice and you're able to tell your parents, this is not what I want to do. And I'm trained in music. So I decided to quit that company and join Sony Music. And by the time I think my folks had given up on me, basically said, just leave this fellow, let him do what he wants. So I think after that, it's been an upward kind of journey for me, because I primarily worked in Sony, then I worked in radio for many years. I set up radio channels. So all of those learnings really helped me, because music and radio, it's all about storytelling. It's all about communication. It's all about how do you put ahead the story, and I feel art, music, culture, fashion, they all go hand in hand, and India is so rich that they're very closely interlinked. After I worked in radio, I worked in Tanishq with the design team for a few years. And now I work with a internet fiber services company. So all of this was kind of influential in me wanting to do what I wanted to do. So Varnam actually started around 9 years ago, when, like a midlife crisis, because until I joined ACT, I was literally working in entertainment and doing what I love to do. And then I joined a very typical corporate firm, and I kind of needed an outlet for my creative side. And so I decided I would work in crafts, because I was always attracted to it. So that's when, so around 9 years ago, I started working in the craft sector, pro bono, for Fab India, actually. So I had approached Fab India saying, I'll work for free. Can I work on a project on a craft based in Karnataka? And that craft was the Channapatna craft. Because what's interesting is, if you look at any of the major retail stores in India, a lot of the product design selection happens from Delhi. And it's very north influenced. So you don't really, even if you go into a major craft store in Bangalore or in Chennai, you're not going to find crafts from Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. You're going to find crafts from Rajasthan, Gujarat, Udaipur, Jaipur. In and around Muradabad. So my whole thing
They've
was
also become quintessential craft centers, right? And it's just become like that. Yeah.
It's, most of the exports again happen from, so the world also looks at India as a craft center, and primarily Rajasthan and Gujarat,
yeah,
and Orissa as well. But nothing beyond this. And I really felt that the Channapatna craft hadn't been explored, and I could see through what was available, the potential of the craft. And that's how Varnam started, saying, I'll do a project for Fab India for free over the weekends. And that's where it began, really. The idea or the seed was germinated then.
So when you said, like, had you been to Channapatnam before? Had you had some sort of experience over there? So why this particular craft? I know it's from South India, sure, and that's kind of your heritage, but there is just so much going on there as well, right? There's a lot of other handicrafts as well there.
So when I started 9 years ago, the Channapatna craft, if you walk, I used to attend all the craft festivals, and a typical stall in Channapatna would have keychains and some toys, Mysore inlay work, and a lot of that mishmash of products. And I was really attracted to that craft. And I have obviously seen it, because when you go from Bangalore to Mysore, you see the craft.
Right.
And I've visited some of the units. So I really felt that this craft could be much more than that. And for me, the craft spoke to me, and which is why when I approached Fab India, I was very clear that why don't we do a series of lighting using crafts, using the Channapatna craft. So my first collection was actually a collection of lighting.
Okay. So actually, before we get into your product line and your collection, why don't we tell our audience, for those who are not familiar with the Channapatna craft, if you can just tell us a little bit about it, about its history and how it's made, the production of it, because a lot of us know that it is, they're known as wooden toys, right? But there's a lot more to it. There's a larger story to that.
Yes. So Channapatna craft essentially came, it was born in a way in the 18th century, not in the current form, in a very different form, thanks to Tipu Sultan. So Tipu Sultan used to love wooden toys. So he brought in a lot of artisans from Persia to current day Channapatna and to Mysore actually to teach. So Tipu Sultan actually set up a lot of craft centers, whether it's silk, whether it's craft, Channapatna, a lot of other crafts. So he really loved the arts and crafts. So a lot of artisans came and started teaching the local artisans how to make wooden toys. Obviously, the toys then were made of far more rustic. They were made of ivory, rosewood, sandalwood. And then by the 40s and 50s, the craft had literally, started dying. In the 1950s, the Maharaja of Wadeyar tried to revive the craft, and he sent an artisan to Japan to kind of see what they could learn, because Japan, a lot of Asian countries have similar crafts. And he came back, and that is in a way the second birth of, or the rebirth of the craft. He came back and he taught artisans, which is why a lot of the artisans who still work in this craft are from the Muslim community. But again, by the 70s, exports came in a big way. And at that time, they realized a lot of these, what they call the lathe, it's like on what they turn the wood, and then the colors are applied. So which is why if you see the craft, everything has to be circular and symmetrical. So at that point of time, they started bringing in power-driven lathe machines on which the wood would turn, and then they would carve and apply the colors. And so the 70s 80s onwards, they started bringing power-driven lathe machines. But by the 90s, again, the craft started dying. A lot of Chinese toys entered the market. People weren't really doing it the right way. The government then intervened, and they started encouraging the use of natural colors. A lot of artisans from Etikopaka were brought in to teach and revive the craft. So it's seen its ups and downs, to reach where it is today.
And so because we're talking about this kind of wood turning, there have been a lot of restrictions as well, right? So you'll find all your Channapatna toys, like you said, A, they're wood, B, they're circular, and they have this, they're symmetrical. But also because of that process, they're rather small in scale. So you don't have like very big objects, but you could make big objects by assembling smaller pieces.
Yes. So it's extremely labor intensive.
Right.
In fact, even when I started working on the craft, until then, or most of the stuff that was done were toys, whistles, keychains, napkin rings. A whole lot of Channapatna used to export napkin rings in a big way. And all the diameters used to be up to a maximum of 6 centimeters. So in Channapatna, everything is in mm. Everybody talks in mm. So when they say 50, it means 50 mm. So the maximum used to be 50 to 60 mm. And I wanted to create lamp bases which were 100 mm. So suddenly the dynamics of the craft changes, because once the diameter changes, the raw material changes, the seasoning time for wood changes, your hands have to be really sturdy, because what people need to understand is when the wood is turning on a lathe, your hand has to be really steady. And as the diameter increases, you have to be able to maintain it very well. So it's more and more tougher. So a lot of the artisans were comfortable creating smaller objects. Suddenly with these, in their terms, it was twice the diameter. So it meant that they literally learned with us. So over a period of time, now the artisans have a very steady hand. They do very cleverly. But when people ask, oh, why Channapatna toys are so cheap? Why is the lighting more expensive? Because it is labor intensive, because it's raw material intensive, because it's time intensive.
Actually, this might be a good time to show our audience some of the work that you've been doing and some of the products that you've been making. We're already getting requests from like different platforms saying, can we please see some examples? So if I can have the team just pull up some of those images. Karthik, do you want to tell us which ones to show?
I mean, any of the products. Did I show any lighting?
Okay, so they're just going to arrange that, and we will be showing some products. Till then, if you can see this beautiful, necklace that I'm wearing is one of, Karthik, you want to tell them what it's called and the process maybe?
Yeah, so
it's one of your hottest selling items, I believe.
Yeah, so it was one of the earliest designs that I did. It's a jewelry piece. It's called the Trikones, and it's to date been one of the most popular pieces of ours. Well, that's a beautiful game. It's called A Breath of Fresh Air, wherein the idea is to create learning activity games to teach kids about environment and let them create their own version of trees and homes, to understand and teach them what is the ecological balance between having trees and human beings.
Oh, lovely.
So the idea is they create how many people and how many trees can you create? So if they create more trees, then you have a dialogue with them is how many trees So the idea came from an article which said that each human should be having at least 5 trees for us to be sustainable. So the idea came from that. So this was one of the newer games that we've designed, And
so can we flip through some more images, please?
So that's one of our, so that's one. So that's the machine I'm talking about, like a fan-like thing, which is almost blurred. That is what keeps the lathe going. And while it is turning at a really high speed, you can actually cut off your hands if you're not careful, And that's one of our rock star artisans. Her name is Pallavi. and that's her applying the product's color. That's her applying and finishing off the product as it is turning. So you need to have a really steady hand while you're doing this. Otherwise, the finish would not be great.
So Karthik, can you tell us, because there are various steps to the process, right?
Yes.
Just in terms of like, preparing the wood, actually
Yes.
creating the form, then applying the color and finishing
Yeah.
it. So can you just kind of break this down a little bit for us?
Yeah, so the whole idea first starts with depending on the design. Now that is a smaller product, so it can be made a little more quickly, but it still has several components. So if you look at each product, there are several components. So this is the bee, for example. It has a body, it has the ears, it has the wings. Now, depending on the skill of the artisan, several artisans come together to create one product. So it's a very collaborative team process. There is a set of artisans who do the carving. There is a set of artisans who are good at applying the color. There are a set of artisans who can do the larger pieces. There are the newer entrants who can do the smaller pieces. So they all come together to create one product.
So it's not one person who works on one
not.
piece from beginning to end, but it's more like an assembly line where
So
everyone's working with different components.
Yes. So the whole craft is very ecologically balanced in a way, like most crafts, because what's the beauty of crafts in India is that it's very indigenous to that region. So the wood is from that region. The colors are sourced from in and around that region. And there are different, so there's somebody who supplies the wood, someone who supplies the colors, someone who supplies the other raw materials, the shellac. And so it starts with letting the wood season. So if it's a larger product, like this, for example, it looks very simple, but I can only do 25 pieces of this in a month. And that's been our biggest roadblock, because the wood takes so long. As the longer diameter pieces of wood, because they are solid wood, they need to season so that it's not wet,
Right.
So it takes time. So it takes us 60 days to season this wood. And we don't have that kind of, the artisans do not have that kind of money to be able to buy raw materials for all. So they have to buy and then sell. So it's a very, cash flow is always an issue. So this is one of the issues of work handicrafts, right? That you cannot create a huge volume at any given point of time.
Right.
So the wood needs to season. Once it's seasoned, then you rough turn it to give it the raw shape. Then you again let it season for 2 weeks. And then you turn it on the lathe and make it, give it the form. And then someone else takes it over to apply the color on it after they sand it. And then using a palm leaf, they finish it off. So the final glossiness that comes from mixing these natural colors with shellac. So even mixing the colors is a laborious process. There are artisans who specialize only in doing that. So each artisan has a skill set to make this come together.
Okay, we'll come back to the apparel later. I wanted to talk to you also a little bit about, so like you yourself said, right? The whole craft started off as toys, and a lot of people also know them to, some jewelry sort of products like bangles have always been very popular.
Yes.
But you have taken this entire craft and you've kind of turned it into a product line. And we're talking about different scales of product, different uses. We've gone into home decor and stuff like that. So why did you feel the need to shift focus from toys into other products?
Right. So to take this back, I think the way it started is it had started as a pro bono project for Fab India, but it didn't really take off, And by that time, I had made several trips to Chanpatna. I had started meeting a lot of artisan groups. When I had started working, I realized a lot of the artisan groups weren't mixing colors, weren't using natural colors. A lot of them were hand painting stuff. They were calling it as Chanpatna, but it was not the traditional craft that it was kind of revived in the 50s. So I had already started approaching a lot of clusters. And so when the Fab India project didn't go forward after a point, I suddenly had these artisans who I had created and made samples with, and they were like, are you going to give us work? Are you going to buy this? Right. So that's how it started. So I had like a moral responsibility to say, I'm going to do this on my own. And I had a job and I would do this on weekends. So it was really one of those things which impulsively I said, let me just do this. So I said, I'll create a line of lighting products. And I had an exhibition in a store and I said, let's see how it goes. And it was a sellout. And after the exhibition was over, people were still approaching the store asking for more of those products. So it started from there where I started creating one after the other. And I started really enjoying the craft. The thing is, Mrinalini, is that I I'm not a designer. So I
Hmm.
didn't approach at it from a design point of view.
I wanted to ask you because you know what happens very often is that having a design education also restricts you and puts
Yes,
you in certain binds. And
yes,
given that you're not a trained designer, I wanted to
yes.
ask you, how have you approached this particular initiative? Because do you feel, you know, in a way liberated and not bound to anything?
So I remember around 7 years ago, I had an exhibition in One Shanti Road, which is an art gallery in Bangalore. And a very prominent design school here, the principal had come, and she looked at my all the collection and she asked, "Are you a trained designer?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, that explains." Because
Exactly.
she said a trained designer would not have so many products in such a short span of time. Because I mean, I had just gone berserk because I was there every weekend and saying, okay, what do I do now? Okay, what do I do now? And the artisans were so excited because they were creating products that they had never created before,
Hmm.
and this was a unit full of girls who were very happy to explore. And so it was just a very fun collaborative. So the first 4 years we were turning around products left, right, and center. I didn't even know if they would sell, but luckily I think because the designs were interesting and they were something like that had not been done before, and more importantly they were functional. So I
Hmm.
was very clear that I had to look at this from a consumer point of view, because I strongly felt that a craft, if it loses its relevance, then it will die. So
So do
I
you,
felt
sorry, go ahead.
No, so I felt the craft has to be something that you experience and enjoy and use as part of your daily life. And only if it's useful will people buy it, And I also felt that the craft you had to do justice to the craft. I mean, make it contemporary, but at the same time, not take away the essence, which is the essence of this craft is it's toy-like and quirky. And
Hmm.
I've always retained it. So
So
that's what has worked.
that's interesting because a lot of people, you know, like I'm curious to know whether is there a market for toys today or 9 years ago, or is there more a market for these kind of products? Like you said, that your products need to be functional. So are we looking at from the consumer's perspective? Are we looking at creating collections that serve a certain purpose and are more functional, or are we looking at toys that can just be recreational or for leisure? It's you know, just to kind of on the same lines, there was an experiment that somebody did very recently where she literally put there's this I think she was a house mom or something, and she put her toddler in a high chair, and she started giving this child sets of objects, right? And on one hand, she'd give, let's say, like a really expensive something very ergonomical or something very tactile, these highly researched toys that were made specially for children. And on the other hand, she'd put like a, I don't know, something like a set of car keys, or she'd put like an everyday household object, right? It could be a glass or it could be anything. And repeatedly this child kept going for the mundane object as opposed these really specialized, highly, I don't know, crafted toys.
Right.
And so this mother at the end of half an hour exclaims that, you know what, it doesn't matter what you give a child to play with, they'll just play with anything.
And
So it doesn't have to be this, you know, highly thought of object. But what is there a market for? Do toys still have that market besides Hamleys, of course?
I think the market for toys, especially handmade, eco-friendly wooden toys, which are very touch and feel, is increasing. When incidentally, I didn't design toys for the first 4 years. I did not design a single toy because
Hmm.
I was very afraid of designing toys, right?
Why is
And
that?
because a lot of my friends are very involved mothers, and I knew that if I designed something which was thoughtless, they would kill me. So it was. I mean, I have seen parents of today are very very engaged with their kids.
Hmm.
They are very clear. There are a lot of the women also have mothers groups. There are play dates. There are kids school groups where they are constantly engaging, talking. So I didn't design my first toy until I was sure about the wood that I was sourcing, until I had tested my colors, until I was sure that these are safe for kids, because Chanpatna has this reputation of being using natural colors and seasoned wood. But that was actually not the case when I started working, because everybody said, yeah, yeah, these are natural colors. But to test a color is expensive. and the
Right.
artisan does not have the power to do that, right? So they would assume that the colors that they are sourcing is safe, but a lot of times they weren't. There were
Mm.
days when I would take the color and put it in my tongue and the color would change, and I really would panic. So I was very clear that I would design home and jewelry, but I would not touch kitchen items or toys until I was sure about the source. So only when I was clear that this is so what my foundation is rock solid, that I started designing toys. And I also wanted to educate myself. So I really studied a lot on Montessori, on toys, on motor skills, what are motor skills? And that's when I started designing it. And I realized that I really enjoyed designing toys.
And you were doing all of this while you still continued to
Yes,
have your corporate job. So
yes,
you're not one of those, classic examples of having been in a corporate setup for 20 years, gotten sick of it, throw your hands up in the air and then say, okay, I'm going to discover my life and then go and, do something artsy. But what
yeah,
you've actually done is that you're running on these parallel tracks and you
yeah.
continue to do that.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
how does one feed into another?
I love my corporate job. I mean, I love it. I've been in my company for 12 years. I, of course, do not go into work every day. I
Hmm.
remember 5 years back when I wanted to quit, my CEO called me and he said, listen, don't be stupid. You're not going to earn anything in the social sector. Do this on the side. I'm happy as long as work does not suffer. And
Right.
I'm so glad I heard him because for me, I feel the discipline that I have in my corporate life feeds into my social sector work, and the creativity that I get in my social sector work feeds into my corporate life. So, and I'm able to balance it, touch wood, and I enjoy both of it. And what has happened is my artisans actually are have become very disciplined. So we actually have weekly production reports, we have review meetings. I mean, and they work with Excel. So you shouldn't underestimate what an artisan can do in order to make a livelihood. And they follow production schedules. Until COVID hit, we would have production schedules up to 3 months in advance.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
so that's how we work. Because what
Hmm.
people need to understand is, if I need to do a floor lamp in September, my wood has to be sourced in June
Seasoned, yeah.
and seasoned by the time I can start the work.
Right.
So when people say, until 3 days ago, someone, I love your work, but why is it expensive? Ma'am, it takes me 4 months to do a floor lamp and I can only do 10 pieces at a time. You're right.
I'm
So
definitely going to come back to the value and the price of craft, but I also want to understand from you, Karthik, you very importantly, you kind of brought up saying that do not underestimate the capability and the potential that we are sitting on, right? And the
yes,
people, manpower that we have.
yeah,
You've obviously introduced a lot of changes in the process,
yeah,
right? And being a traditional craft, people used to do it in their own way. They had their own systems of
right,
creating what they did. But here you come in and you say, okay, we are going to do something that is different to what you've been doing. And we're
right,
going to do it in a manner which is different.
right.
So, in having introduced all these new changes, and so did they take it positively, or have they been, or was it a little bit of a challenge for them to adapt to your suggestions?
Right. So I work with different units. So one of them is all male, and
Mm.
sorry, I had some light fidgeting. So one of the units were all women, or they were younger girls, and I really found that the established male artisans, when I would give a design, they would say, "Sir, this is fine, but why don't we do this?" So there was a little bit of aggressive behavior in not wanting to do it exactly the way that I wanted. But the girls were it was a clean slate, right? So they were very happy to do whatever we could because they were excited. So I initially started doing all my designs with a bunch of my girls who would do these products. And when the other units that I worked with started seeing that what is possible, and
Mm.
they also realize that, okay, this guy is here to stay, he's serious about it. Because what happens with a lot of artisans typically is, when designers come to work with them, they work on a project or two, and then designers are hungry to create and to explore their potential. Then they move on to another craft, and a lot of times the artisans are left high and dry without a sustained source of income. Whereas for me, for the last 9 years, I have been working in Chanpatna sustainably, and which is what we always say, is that the objective is to give a sustained livelihood. And that means that I have to continuously create products. And once my artisans understood that, and once they had a regular income, they were really willing to explore anything, you know.
And tell us about the women that you've employed over here, because I mean, you know, a lot of people have these apprehensions about employing women, especially if they're traditionally not part of that craft sector. But here you have gone on to employing women. I believe some of your units are women only, and they seem to be a lot more efficient than others.
So the attention to detail is definitely much more in with the girls. I mean, I'll give you a small example. So a typical day when I design in Chandpatna is I start from Bangalore at 7 and I reach there at 10 because the roads are very bad. So it's actually a 1 hour journey, but takes 3 hours.
Oh, wow.
And I typically, the unit shuts at 6. I mean, 2-3 instances. Like for example, one of the days one of the girls was was very angry, and she obviously had some issues at home. And the other girl told her by the way, they all speak Tamil and Kannada. So I speak Tamil. So most of my girls speak Tamil. So language wasn't a barrier. So I heard her tell the other artisan saying, listen, if your heart is not in it, don't do it today. If you're not happy, don't do it. I mean, simple things like that. Or if it is 6 o'clock, the guys would get up immediately. Okay, it's time to go. The girls would say, sir, you've come from this far. We will sit for another 1 hour, you know? So little nuances like that, which I really feel is very typical. I mean, even in a corporate life, I've always seen there's far more empathy with my women colleagues than with the male, right? And I think that I was very lucky because I realized that I worked very well with female artisans. So I was all for employing female artisans and training them on it because they were very adaptable and they were very good. So I've been very lucky in that sense.
And how many units are you running right now? Or how many units have there been as part of your team?
Well, before COVID, there were 4. I mean, now we can only support 2, you know.
So the last 5 months have been challenging, clearly.
I mean, it's not a great, it's been more than challenging. Yeah. And we've never, I mean, touch wood, we've never had a period in the last 8 or 9 years where the artisans had orders 3 months in advance, you know. Now we are struggling to even give an order for the next 2 weeks, you know. So yeah, we're literally scrambling day to day.
So you've had to shut down certain units. What about your retail?
Yeah, so we were retailing through 3 of our stores. We've shut down 2 and we are only retailing through 1 now, you know. Because the idea is right now, and I mean, this is not going anywhere. This is what it's going to be for the next 1.5 years. So the idea was just self-sustenance, you know, and it's heartbreaking because, I mean, you get calls every day saying, okay, sir, what do we do now? And it's really hard. I mean, that's how it is, you know, so it's not an easy.
So if you don't mind me asking, what's the kind of support that you've gotten through this? And I mean, administrative and government support.
Well, I've never got any government support. You know, I think a lot of people find it very hard to believe that I do this along with the job without taking a single paisa from it. And people are always trying to find out what is the intent behind it. And I remember a very dear friend of mine, including a lot of my friends, would feel that, oh, he's doing very well and he's making a lot of money in it. And the truth is that I do it because it feeds my soul. You know, I mean, I've given up a lot in my corporate career to be able to do this. And what my friend told me is that people find it very hard to believe that you can just do it because you're passionate about it. So you can do something without money being the driving force, you know. So for me, money has never been the driving force. It's been the thrill. I mean, even today, I'm like an excited child. I'm going to Chandpatna next week. And I'm excited 3 days before it, thinking, what am I going to do? Who's going to be there? I'm already calling up and checking, is she here? Is she going to be there? You know, so I still feel excited about the craft 9 years down the line. And that's what is important for me, you know.
But Karthik, you're in a place of privilege where you don't need to you don't need to pressure yourself in saying that I'm doing this for the money or for the livelihood. And you've chosen that, right? And you've chosen to kind of stick with your corporate job and to run that parallelly. And that feeds into... So that's kind of funding this side of your life as well.
Yeah. I mean, my salary literally funds my artisans as well. I mean, people don't know, but a part of my corporate salary goes into maintaining it, you know,
Right.
and that's how we are surviving. I mean, for somebody, the thing is, Mrinalini, for someone, I mean, this is the beauty of India, right? I'm born and brought up in Bombay. I'm from Chettinad. I'm born and brought up in Bombay. I lived there most of my life. And then I work in Karnataka, and I work in a craft in Karnataka where the artisans are they are Tamilians, they are from Andhra, they are from Maharashtra. So they speak Hindi, Marathi, Tamil, Telugu, and Kannada. And it's a very diverse, and they come from a diverse, so on in a group of artisans, some are Christians, some are Hindus, some are Muslims. It's a very diverse, and that's the beauty of Chanpatna. So the thing is, they all work together to make this happen, you know, and people don't realize that. And it's not easy, even though I'm trying to do it myself. It's not easy. The whole reason we set up the stores was to say that, you know, I wasn't comfortable asking people for funds. And the thing is, in India, when you're a social enterprise and you're not an NGO, people look suspiciously at you.
Exactly.
CSR does not fund us. A lot of my friends who work in CSR, they'll say, but you're not an NGO. And there is a reason I was not an NGO. If you look at most NGOs who work in the craft sector and you compare the products that they design with the products that are designed by people who are working as social designers in the social sector, there is a huge difference in the design. And we don't depend on patronage, you know, we sustain based on our passion for this. um, I have not got any support from the government. I mean, we've been written about quite well. We're the only store in entire Karnataka which is promoting and working consistently towards supporting the Chanapatna craft. And not once have we been approached by anyone from the government saying, hey, listen, you're doing this. Can I help you do this on a larger scale? Right? On the other hand, we are constantly having people walk into our stores and harassing us on where is your trade license, or expecting bribes, or expecting free gifts from the shop. So we still do it in spite of all of these, because because we feel for the craft. But it's not an easy journey. I mean, every day you feel, why am I doing this?
No, of course not. It's definitely not an easy journey, and you're battling challenges on multiple fronts, right?
Yes.
On
Yes.
one hand, you're not getting the kind of support that you need.
Yes.
On the other hand, just the damn environment is like this, and globally, unfortunately.
Yes.
On another hand, you've got people who are constantly sort of asking you about the price of your product range,
Yes.
and you're constantly having to fight and justify that. And
Yes.
that's something that actually comes up in all our talks, where we end up wondering, saying that why is it that handicraft is not valued? You know, it's kind of, there's been this cycle, and people have started to now, I think, put more value to handicrafts, but it's still not happening in India as much as
Yes.
it's probably happening in the West.
Yes.
But still, things over here are still considered that if they're made by hand, then instead of putting value to the time and effort that's gone into making them, the question that arises is it of good quality?
Yes.
Right? And so how do you address those concerns?
Right. So there are actually several factors that I want to address. And sometimes, I mean, there are a lot of established bodies that work in the craft sector, and I've seen the language that they use. Sometimes they will. I mean, I don't call myself a designer. I call myself a craftpreneur, right? Because for some reason, designers have been abused for very unjustly, I feel, right? And a lot of established bodies in the craft sector will say, oh, designers come and work with crafts and they fleece them and they sell it at higher margins. Let's get one thing right. Crafts cannot survive without design intervention, right? And that's the only way forward. There needs to be an incentive for the designer as well to work in it. And it's important for the designer to sustain so that he can continue to redefine the craft. The artisans can't do it on their own, right? The same artisan who work with us before they started working with me, and what they created and what they create now, there is a huge difference, and it has definitely helped their skill sets. The other thing is, I feel that social sector organizations need the same kind of support, which we don't get, right? So there are several factors that go into this, and the only way to do this is through constant craft and design interventions.
But what about this whole idea of, you know, the focus on revival and the focus on bringing attention back to what these artisans are doing?
Yes.
Is that actually happening? Are we being able to do that? Are we actually being able to mainstream that?
Right. So when I first started working on the on Chanpatna, I started creating. I didn't want to do toys for the simple reason that people always called it Chanapatna toys. I
Mm.
mean, even when the press wrote about it, even though we created lights and we created home accessories, the press would go and write, "Oh, the Chanpatna toys made by Varnam is beautiful," and we weren't creating toys, you know. But then I realized that to be true to the essence of the craft, I had to also create toys, and that's when we started creating toys. So, but what saw is that the more and more we created a wider range, people started engaging with the craft much more, and the appeal grew. And the artisans also felt excited to create and something that was different and interesting. So it fed on each other, you know. So it started with lights, then it moved on to home accents, then jewelry, then toys. Now we are creating fusions with other products. So it's a constant reinvention. And at one point, I realized when the artisans came to me and said, "Sir, it's great you're doing your designs, but we also have our traditional stuff that we do.
Mm.
And why don't you showcase that?" And that's when I asked myself that it was very unfair to only focus on contemporary designs, but it was also important to showcase what the traditional designs were. And which is why 2 years ago, we started this whole thing called Reviving Lost Traditions, where a lot of the dolls so Chanpatna essentially used to create a lot of dolls for Navaratri or the Dasara festival. And they used to embody a lot of the rustic scenes from in and around the village life.
Right.
And they had stopped over the last decade. If you actually go to Chanpatna, you would actually not find these toys because people weren't finding it interesting enough to buy it anymore. So we started getting them to create a lot of the toys that they had created 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And they started getting excited about creating those products. So we've actually revived a lot of older dolls that were not being made, which now a lot of other units in Chanapatna have also started doing it because they have realized that Varnam has been successful in promoting these toys. So we are also presenting the rustic designs of Chanapatna along with the contemporary designs so that people see that what the craft is and what it can be.
So there's one thing where you're talking about rustic and you're talking about the original designs that Chanapatna was known for, right?
Yes.
But another way of approaching this is also that, okay, Chanapatna is known for creating toys. Now, instead of producing the same toy and redoing that, is there a market? Is there a toy market in the country? Is there a way to kind of revolutionize the whole, the scene, the toy scene, for the lack of a better phrase, in the country, or even take that global? But is the consumer actually wanting that, is the question.
Oh, definitely. I mean, our best-selling, I mean, we've always done well with our toys, and especially toys which are learning-oriented or activity-oriented. Parents are very happy to buy toys because a lot of parents increasingly want their kids to hold something, to experience it, for it to be organic. They also want it to be safe, so that they constantly ask, is it safe? Can the child put in the mouth? So a lot of parents are becoming very conscious about eco-friendly, well-made, well-designed toys. And at the same time, there is a huge market. I mean, in our store in Bangalore, more than 50% of the people who used to come in before COVID were foreigners. And I mean, I've been able to travel all over Europe, and there really is nothing like the Chanapatna craft anywhere in the world. I mean, I can really say this with a lot of confidence now, because if you look at the toys that we create, even if they are functional, they have a toy-like essence. And that's what I wanted to do, is that if you look, for example, we have a coaster that actually looks like a pig toy, but it's a coaster. You have an owl, which is a kitchen towel holder, right? And I remember someone telling me that, oh, these are too quirky for a craft. And I said that, you have to have fun with the craft. So we've always retained the essence that it is a toy craft. It looks like a toy, but these are toys with a twist. So there is a huge growing audience for well-made toys, for educational toys, and for just toys that you want to engage with and have fun. And I mean, I still love creating toys.
So maybe we can show some more images of your products. I know that is it called the Oink set?
Yeah, the Oinkton. Yeah, we have gotten few awards for that. Yeah.
Very popular. I have the salt
Yes.
and pepper shaker.
Yeah.
which is absolutely adorable. So perhaps we can pull up some of those images. And while the team is doing that, I actually wanted to talk to you about collaborations. And we've had a couple of questions on the same lines that have come up. Is
Right.
that would you consider, or are you in the process of collaborating with other designers, or whether it's architects or product designers or toy designers, or any other professionals from the design industry?
So we have in the past tried working with architects. Uh, so the so I'll tell you where we get stuck. So for
Careful what you
example,
say. We have a lot of them in the audience. Just kidding.
well, so I'll tell you. I think what happens is when you're creating a customized product, then there is a fair bit of time that goes into prototyping it and creating a customized one-off product, and it is expensive to create that. And we have in the past at times, so say, created a drop light for someone, and if it was costing say 12,000 rupees, and someone would say, oh, but I see a light for 2,500 on your website, so why is this costing 12,000? And people don't understand is that when I have to work, I have a limited production that I work with. When I have to work, by the way, with artisans, I mean, if people have worked with artisans, we know artisans do not want to create prototypes, right? Because every time you have to beg them that, because every time you need to create prototypes, they have to stop their current work, which earns them a livelihood, put it aside, and create new designs. So when customers and designers approach me and saying, hey, why don't you create one product for me? And I'm giving you work, people don't realize is in that time that it takes to create that one design, they can actually earn a few thousand rupees by creating products which are already designed. So I have to always, so most of our designing happens in the periods which are lean, where the sales are low, which is basically Feb to June. The rest of the year, we only have to create product. We have to produce these designs because there are exhibitions through which we sell. And
Right.
this is, and people need to understand we come from a model which is again sustainable livelihoods, which means I have to give them work constantly, which means I have to sell, right, to feed them work. So that cycle continues. So when designers work with us, we are very happy provided we can work in a certain time frame and they are willing to pay the money for it, because also we that the products that we create, the wood has been seasoned, the colors are natural, we pay fair wages, the colors are tested. So all of this comes at a price, which if they are willing to do, then we are very happy to. In fact, incidentally, we started something called a Re-Emerge initiative around 4 months ago, where we had asked a lot of designers to come and create designs, and we were very happy to give them design credit. And we had also suggested that instead of giving them a royalty, we'll pay that royalty to the artisans. Of course, COVID came and a lot of things went haywire and we couldn't do it. But we didn't really get great support because a lot of the designers who wanted to work said, okay, how much are you going to pay me for it? And
Right.
and this in spite of it being very clear that this was during lockdown where we said, you have the time, you're home, can you use your talent to create something for these artisans, and we'll tell you that it's designed by so and so. And there were very few designers who came forward to help. Incidentally, all of them were women. I didn't have a single male designer who was willing to come forward. I don't know what it says, but and there were very few who came forward to work on, you know. So it wasn't a very encouraging experience then, but I'm hoping we can revive it still.
I do hope we can, because there is a lot of talent and there's a lot of potential in collaborations.
True.
So it would be lovely to see, and to use this kind of, take it as a challenge and to use this craft to create a collection. And I'm sure
Yes.
there are lots of designers and architects who are listening to us, and please reach out directly to Karthik to see what you guys can do together. In
Yeah.
fact, we've got Nidhi Goyal, who is asking how students can reach out to you for internships. So would you be willing to take students as well to work with you?
So I did take on some interns in the past, uh, and yeah, what I have found is when a lot of interns come from the premier design schools, I think working in crafts, Mrinalini, they have to understand it's not easy. One of the things that I have found, um, and if I can be frank here, because I
Of
haven't gone
course.
to a design school, I have seen a lot of the designers do the design and spend the design time on the computers on 3D modeling. and creating objects with clay.
Hmm.
And when I would ask them that, why don't you just go to the unit and just go there 7 days a week, don't design, just watch, just observe. It was very difficult for me to come back. They would go for one trip, come back and say, okay, I have an idea. Why don't we do this design?
Hmm.
Right? And what people need to understand is in design and craft, it doesn't involve a computer, a pen and a paper. It involves a human being. And a lot of your good design comes as a collaborative process with the artisan and with the energy and uh, camaraderie that you have with the artisan. So if you get along well with the artisan, you will create a fantastic product. If you just give them a drawing and say, do it, it will not have that touch. And I feel design students often, and I feel it's a lot to blame with the way design is taught in the country, is I feel a lot of kids come with very set notions on what they want to do. And I have realized it's not an enjoyable experience for me, right? Especially if it's a 2 month internship. I don't blame them. They need to turn around products in 2 months. Everything is done so hurriedly. So I often say, if you're going to work with me, come for a 6 month internship. And for the first 2 months, you will not design. You will just build a rapport with the artisan, which not everyone is willing to do. So if they are willing to do that, then yeah, I would love to.
I think you hit a very important point where, especially in the country today, we are design education is approached in a manner where the designer is separated from the production.
Yes.
And what happens is that as a designer, you design and you hand over instructions to a production unit. Now, whether that's
Yes.
in architecture, it could be your contracting team at site, or whether it's in product design, it could be in your sort of manufacturing unit. But there is this distance between the designer and the production, which
Yes.
definitely needs to be bridged. And
Yes.
like you very rightly said, there needs to be this constant dialogue and exchange between those two ends in order for you to create something that can actually work well.
Yes. True.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I also want to take this opportunity to talk about some of the things that you're doing using the Chanapatna craft, but making things other than wooden toys or toy-like objects. For example, you've gone into apparel, and apparel is something that is very popular,
Yeah.
reaches out to a much larger audience and target group,
Yes. Yes.
and is a tool that can be used to tell your story very effectively, right?
Yes.
And you've used that in a very innovative manner. So tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So my toys range is called Tipu's Toys. So that's actually a snail. So Mrinalini, all my toys have names. So
Yes.
since I come from the music industry, the first thing when we created an album is, what do we call this album? And we would have brainstorming sessions. So I have realized that it's very important. I would say, like, my toys are my Disney characters, right? So I have Slippy Slops, which are the snails. I would have the Oingstons, or I would have the Gyani Goobays. Because a lot of times in India, when we say Ullu ke patte, owls have a very negative connotation, right? But in Indian mythology, owl is also considered as a symbol of wisdom, right? And so I wanted to turn it around and call it Gyani Goobays. Or when I created a game called Chatur Chidiya, at that time, Angry Birds was very popular. So I wanted to put a positive spin on it. So when we created a balancing toy, we called it Chatur Chidiya. So all of them have names. And that's my unit of all girls who work on it.
Oh, maybe we can just go back. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're all girls, so you can see them. That's yeah. So when I started creating a lot of these designs, and I mean, I was very happy to share them online, because I felt the more people searched us and people knew about us, they would come and buy our products. I also started realizing that a lot of designers and established organizations started making replicas of it, and they would take printouts of our work and go to the artisans and say, "Can you do this for me?" And when we would ask them, they would say, "Oh, when I Google searched it, I thought it's a traditional Chanapatna product. But you look at our design, you know that it's not a traditional." So I just thought that, how is it that I can own the designs that I create and own the motives? And that's when I said, so even in this, if you look, there's an owl print over there. So that's our owl toy.
Yeah, on the Potli. Yes.
On the Potli. And that's a block printing that happens in Bagh. So I said, how if I create block prints around these to make our motifs popular, and hence using that also talk about the craft. So that's how we came up with an entire range of apparel called Tipu's Toys, where we started I mean, it was just fun. And what happened is that it just really took off, because initially people would think, oh, is this nightwear? Do I wear it at night? And I would get very offended and say, no, it's just fun prints. Because even block printing until then had paisleys and tree of life. And, it was very serious. We weren't having fun with it. So I started creating objects or apparel that was inspired from our toys. And suddenly we have 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds kids who were not engaging with crafts, walking into our store and picking up the apparel. And with each apparel, we would also give an information on what the craft is. So people then engaged with the Channapatna craft. So it was a great way to talk about the craft and the Channapatna toy craft.
That's wonderful. And it's done really well, this entire collection, hasn't it?
I mean, it still continues to do well for us.
Yeah, and so you have little shirts for
kids,
for
yes,
children and for kids,
yeah. We've created saris, yeah. So
Karthik, are you hopeful about the state of crafts and the state of handicrafts in the country today, as an entrepreneur yourself?
No.
Why is that?
So when I decided to shut down my store, it was not, we could have survived. I just came to, I mean, I've been doing this for 9 years and I had great plans for Varnam. I mean, I wanted it to be the next Fab India because I really thought that what we did was interesting and it was contemporary. But I realized that I can't play the game ethically. I mean, I'm very strong on my ethical values, right? I will call a spade a spade. And it's very difficult to run a business ethically in this country, especially now. And I just came to the conclusion that it's very difficult to run a local business, a made in India business, and really grow it. And which is when I realized during COVID, saying that let me just go back to where it all started and just work within my limits, and it's fine. And if I can't grow it beyond, the reason I wanted to grow it for the only reason was that so that we could reach out to more and more artisans, because there were a lot of artisans who were approaching us saying, listen, we don't have work. Can we do something? Right? So the only idea was to be able to reach out to more artisans, if not for anything else. And I realized that wasn't possible because at every step of the way, it was becoming difficult. I mean, demonetization just killed the backbone really. And then you had GST, which is a nightmare. The whole premise of a GST is a one tax, one country. The reality is far from it. And I was someone who had to do my job and do my accounting and figure out all of these various complications. And the GST laws keep changing even now, every month. You have new rules suddenly coming up, which is what GST is a nightmare for CAs as well, right? So, and then you have COVID, and then even before COVID, the economy had taken a downturn. So it's very difficult, I feel, to run a craft-centric local business ethically in India. And I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. I really don't think.
If you wanted to see two things change, what would those two things be?
Well, I want crafts to move beyond hashtags in India. I really do. I mean, the only reason craft is surviving is because of the patronage of a lot of wonderful customers who really are talking about going local and supporting the local kirana, the local vegetable, your local craft store, your local businesses. So customers are doing whatever it can to sustain the craft. What is the government doing beyond just talking about it?
But that's also a vicious cycle, right? Like the owners can't be on the customer constantly.
Exactly. And which
there has to be, you have to offer some incentive as well so that you can, because your customers need to turn into patrons.
Yes.
And there is a fine line between the two, but you need, and that needs to be a constant as well. It has to be a flowing tap.
Yes. I mean, we've survived only because of our patrons, frankly, because what people don't understand is when I run a store, which is dependent only on, I still remember when I started my first store, a lot of people would say, only Channapatna, why don't you keep other stuff? Why don't you put this craft? I mean, a lot of designers would approach saying, put this craft and put this craft. And my whole idea was to say that I wanted to keep the focus on Channapatna as much as possible so that that craft can be sustainable. And it's not easy running a store with just one craft, and I wanted it to be a destination store. So the only reason we've survived even now is because we focus on that craft and because the patrons who are associated with us support us. But I would really like to see some incentive from the government, and what happens is all of the schemes that are provided by the government, even when we are approached to saying, how many artisans do you work with? When you say 50 or 60, they say, no, you need to touch at least 1,000 artisans. And you often, even with CSR, right? I mean, most of the CSR activities are targeted at providing education and food and eradicating poverty. People don't understand that a craft plays a huge role in providing food, shelter, eradicating poverty. And a lot of times you cannot look at craft only in terms of quantitative numbers. It's also qualitative, because frankly, in the Channapatna craft, what Varnam has done has also given a lot of other units. There are a lot of units in Channapatna who survive by just creating replicas of our work, and that's okay, because that's how they survive, and if that's what they need to do. So you also need to look at the impact that an organization can have and enable them to support 1,000 artisans, and not say, unless you get there, we will not support you. So that's where we are stuck.
Interestingly, we have a question from Rajiv Jain over here, who's saying, what is the scalability of this in terms of the number of artisans who can make a decent livelihood from such products?
So the government has set up a craft park. There are, most of them are shut now, or most of them actually don't do Channapatna stuff. They're doing other stuff, incidentally. They also create, other crafts there, because, it's not easy to survive only with the Channapatna craft. So it is very scalable. We had gotten to a point wherein we could create 1,000 products in a month from where it started. When it began, we would struggle to create, a few thousand products. Initially, we could just do a few hundred. So it is very scalable, but it needs a lot of cash flow. And when you're running a business, cash flow is huge, and GST is not cash flow. GST is not cash flow friendly. So GST literally kills liquidity and cash flow. So you can say, what can the government do? I said the government can make a start by reducing GST, by creating schemes that are social enterprise friendly as well, right? A lot of the artisans directly get support from the government, but a lot of organizations that are working in the craft sector do not necessarily get support, unless you know people, which we don't. I don't.
So you kind of get caught up in all these technicalities, right?
It's a vicious cycle. And a lot of times these things get really bog you down, and you really feel that I wish I could do more, but I don't have the infrastructure or the support to be able to do that.
So given that this is the situation, and unfortunately, you or I individually can't change much of that, but we can kind of hope that together we can do something about this. But given that this is the situation right now, especially the fact that we've got COVID sitting on our heads and it's not going away anytime soon, but people's livelihoods need to continue and people's work needs to continue. What are your plans for the future?
Right. So
I don't even know if this is something that any of us can really answer anymore. But
it's very vague right now. So I'll give you an example. One of the biggest units in Channapatna, which had more than 60 artisans, right? And they were completely working on export orders. All the 60 artisans, very talented, have all disbanded. Nobody has a clue where they are, because there's no work. There is no export orders right now for them. And a lot of the orders that had come have actually also been cancelled. So to add to that, they have made losses. So you don't know. I know artisans who are now doing plumbing work, or they will just do anything to get by for the next 1 year. So a lot of artisans in Channapatna have split, units have shut down. It is anarchy out there right now, right? So even when someone approaches saying that some of my artisans have left, now I need to get them back. So I'm afraid to get them back to the unit until I know that I can sustain, because if they have gone into something and they are doing some work to sustain themselves, if I pull them out and if I can't give them sustained work, then I feel morally responsible for it, right? So until I know that there is a clear path to come out of this, which right now I don't, it's a dangerous thing too. Right now it's just about keeping our head above water and slowly improving. Slowly things are beginning to change. We have people slowly beginning to place orders and come into the store, and things are improving, but it is going to be a while before we had actually reached a momentum last year, Mrinalini, where we had started doing exports, and I actually thought 2021 would be our breakout year, but it's just completely spiraled out of control. We had actually started doing well, and I was planning to open my 4th store in Chennai without any help from anyone. I mean, we don't even get bank loans, because it's difficult, and so every time I need to open a store, it is purely on the basis of our funds and bootstrap. So every time I make a little profit, I open a store. So we were actually begun to reach that certain critical mass wherein we would have been able to create more products, employ more artisans. Unfortunately, COVID struck and we've actually gone back to from where we started. So it's very difficult to answer that question. Right now, I'm only thinking about how do I sustain? How do I just keep my head above water? I really don't know.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate because I think by the time you started to gather steam, and you felt that now you can actually put things back into the cycle.
Yes.
Is when suddenly you fall flat on your face. But I have to say, Karthik, it's very encouraging to hear your story because there are, I'm sure, a lot of young entrepreneurs who are listening to us, and we're getting comments saying, I have somebody over here on Instagram who says, someone called Manifest Design, who's saying that you are creating real change. Keep at it, Karthik. So these are the kind of stories that, we might not be able to necessarily do something on ground or create change on ground, but at least we hope to inspire people, and perhaps, all of us can come together and do something about that as a collective. I also have somebody here on Zoom, Gayatri, who's asking, is there a national association or collective of crafts in India? And if so, is Varnam a part of it? You could perhaps be the body that represents the artisans and crafts to the government.
So, I mean, there are several bodies, right, that are already working on this. But I don't think the current government is very craft focused, frankly. I mean, let's be very clear. I'm going to call a spade a spade. I don't see any hope with this government. I mean, you have someone like Smriti Irani, who is a textile minister, right? Handloom minister. And she's the same one who created a ruckus in Fab India a year ago. And I know the torture that, because I know the torture that people in Fab India went through because of that, right? You have a few months ago, I think it's called the India Handloom Board, which was shut down. And a lot of people said, anyway, they were not doing anything. The India Handloom Board is connected with a lot of cooperatives, right? At a ground level. Yes. Before we taking a massive, and I'm just talking about what is the message that you're giving when you're shutting down something like that, right? And the response was, it's anyway not doing much. Well, that's not, unless you have an alternative, we can't just go around shutting down systems in place that have been around for centuries and are actually working at a ground level with a lot of cooperatives that will now suffer. Right?
Yes, so, Leila Tayebji wrote very distinctly about this as well.
Yeah, and it actually had on board a lot of non-politicians, right? So let's not take the work done by a lot of organizations and people in the past for granted. It may be slow, it may not be at the pace that you want, but having now worked in the craft sector, I mean, I think it's phenomenal, for example, what a Fab India has done. I see a lot of people who also say, oh, but Fab India has become too commercial. Why shouldn't crafts be commercial? I mean, I want a good living, right? Why shouldn't artisans make good living? What is so wrong about being commercial? If that gives them a decent livelihood, why not, right? So I almost feel like people think, oh, they have lost but I think what a Fab India
the novelty goes from the handicraft, no then?
I don't think so, Renali. I think
but isn't that the perception?
That's the perception, yes. But I feel that, I mean, when I see some of the organizations that work in it, whether it's AKFD is another one in Jaipur, and there is also.
I think we've got Gitanjali who's joined us today as well.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Here, yeah.
I mean, I can't do what they do. They're obviously doing something right? There's Good Earth, there's Fab India. I mean, this seems like a brand plug, but when I look at what they have done, I think it's phenomenal that they have been able to gather momentum, because I struggle with it. Right? And people don't realize that it's a lot of work to keep your artisans engaged and wanting to work. And we all do it without any government support, right? So I feel that we really need the right people who have some empathy for our crafts. I mean, in our annual budget, crafts did not even find a mention. And when after agriculture, crafts gives the most livelihood to people, right?
What about the state level?
So,
Is there nothing happening at the state level?
So in Karnataka, I'll tell you, so in the Channapatna especially, a lot of the artisans have they have welfare schemes from the government where they used to be given stipends, not anymore, and they would get a lot of incentives, which also I think would also spoil them in a way, because there is also a lot of red tape and money involved in some of the associations that work on a ground level with craft, right? So it works both ways. I mean, but I have seen that it actually is a more of a deterrent, because quality suffers because you're paid a certain amount for creating a certain product. So in order to make that margins, the quality would suffer, right? So I haven't really seen, I know for a fact that in Chanpatna on a ground level, there isn't anything happening. There are talks. I mean, I would have just expected even a simple stipend of 5,000 rupee for every artisan, so that they don't leave the craft and they continue to stick around. I mean, that itself would have helped.
So basically what we're saying is that we are dependent either on self-funding or private funding.
Yes.
I believe, like, for example, Fab India, and it's some guys you just mentioned again, that Fab India has PE funding, and therefore, managed to become a big corporate.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
they got privately funded.
Yeah.
But that can't be the alternative every time, can it? Especially when you're talking about handicraft, especially when you're talking about getting work done at the ground level.
So, I mean, funding is important, because I would like to ideally have been able to, the idea was, I mean, the idea this year was to employ some designers, because we had gathered that momentum, right? And not necessarily only be bootstrapped, because when you're bootstrapped, liquidity is an issue. When you have funding, then, and if you are, and I believe I can use the funds well, because I come from a corporate background. I mean, without losing the essence of what we do, right? But funding is important to be able to expand. And there are one or two funds that have worked in the social sector that I've approached. And I will not take names, but this is exactly what they would say. Okay, do you see yourself opening 80 stores in the next 5 years? And I would say not 80, because quality would suffer, but can we look at 15 stores? And they would say no, because a lot of funds that are involved in this want to put in money and then exit in 5 years.
Yeah.
And so they want to make a few, like 50 crore, 100 crores. So funding doesn't really, I don't know, unfortunately, unless you have angel investors, which we haven't been lucky enough to get, who will say, listen, I give you some money, and as long as you're, and I will measure you not in terms of your revenue, but in terms of the amount of artisans that you've trained and brought into the craft. I mean, that's a wish list, but that's not happened yet.
So we have an interesting question from Rajiv again, who says, do you have any thoughts about anything you in your personal capacity would have done or could have done differently?
Differently during COVID?
Rajiv, if you're there, you can actually unmute yourself and join the conversation. We'll just give him a minute if he's there and he can join us.
Yeah. I mean,
in your journey. So my question is about your journey in general.
Yeah.
In general, okay.
Would I have done it differently? No, I don't think so. I mean, I have always done things very intuitively, very impulsively. When I started the first store as well, it was very simple. I knew an architect who said, listen, I have some tiles in my basement and it's just gathering dust. I know you're doing fantastic work. I'm just going to give you the basement and pay me a minimal fee and start your store. And I still remember I had a job and I had an opening on a Thursday evening. I quickly came running from office after 6 and I had my opening, and I had staff who were supposed to come the next day and they just didn't join. And I had to take a break from work on Friday and tell my boss just this one day and run the store, So it was just, everything was just impulsively, just took chances. And then we moved into another store. And so everything has been baby steps, and I have done it within my capacity, without risking, without putting too much of risk. So I don't think I would have done anything differently, provided, perhaps I could have just said, I'm just going to quit my job and do this full time and get money. But I'm a Tamilian, I'm not a high risk taker. So,
you're not a high risk taker, but you do know when to take the leap of faith.
Yeah, that I have, yes.
Yeah, and I think that's been quite commendable, Karthik, I have to say. I have to, unfortunately, we're way beyond our 1 hour mark, but I am going to, Gitanjali has just commented saying, governance craft-friendly policies are critical for impetus in the sector. You'd like to respond to that?
Yeah, completely. They are. They are they would be very encouraging also, right? It it would give us incentive to be able to work in it, you know. And I mean, I'm not seeing that currently. I mean, I'll tell you, recently, a lot of people forwarded me messages saying there's a huge focus on toys. Modi ji has made a comment on toys, and now you're going to do very well, buck up. And, you know, my question is, can we start with reducing the GST from 12% and making it 0? That would be a start, right? Because our GST has increased by 2.5 times, and we have absorbed that cost without passing it on to the consumer. How are we supposed to compete? I mean, in Chandpatna, more than 50% of the toys are from China, and they are sold as Chandpatna toys. If you walk into Chandpatna, you will find toys of Shisham that come from North India, and they are sold as Chandpatna toys. You would find Mysore inlay work. You would find toys from Tamil Nadu, right? Why are they doing that? No, but because it's expensive to handmade toys. So if they have to survive, they are just becoming resellers, you know. So you need to start at a ground level.
Well, this is definitely a sensitive subject, especially given the situation that the country is in today. But yes. There is definitely a big difference in saying something and doing something
yes.
in reality.
Yes. Exactly.
And, you know, I mean, there's the biggest joke that's going around is the fact that you've got the Indian flag that is being sold at red light crossings that are made in China.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it is, unfortunately, it is what it is.
Yes, it is.
But,
yes.
You know, we're at a point where I do believe that, yes, we've all got struggles and we're all facing various challenges, but it's very encouraging and it's very inspiring to hear your story and to have people like you who actually can come and, you know, share honestly what they've been through and what their take is. Yeah. And hopefully start something that at least, you know, someone made a comment saying it's very difficult to find like-minded people, but we do hope that forums like these can gather like-minded people and can become some sort of a seeding of thoughts or collectives or, you know, some sort of an initiative. But Karthik, I have to, very unfortunately, I have to wrap it up today, given that we are almost an hour and a half down. Okay. But wow. Thank you so much for joining us today, for taking your time out on a Sunday evening. I want to thank everybody who's joined us on Zoom, on Instagram, on Facebook. I am also giving, I'm taking the liberty of offering Karthik's social media handle and contact details, not phone number and email, but they have their website. So please go through it. They've got the most beautiful products. And you can get in touch with them on Instagram, on social media. You can get in touch with us and we can forward your queries to Karthik. So the idea is to start conversation, to start talking, and to find those like-minded people to come together and do something together. But once again, on behalf of 200 Million Artisans, the big team that's behind the scenes, and Unplugged Talks, Virendra Vaklu and myself, we really thank you for joining us today, having a very candid and honest conversation. I think that's very important. It's important, like you said, to call a spade and to just put it out there, because, you know, a lot of us, we think it, we don't say it.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Suddenly.
Yes. Yeah. No, we can hear you.
No, I mean, I just want to end on a positive note, saying that it's very encouraging to see a lot of youngsters who are, thanks to social media, doing a lot of work in craft and textiles and design. So I think Generation Next is really going to change. I feel bring about a huge change. I've seen some of their work. It's fantastic. I also want to thank Brinali, you, and especially even 200 Million Artisans, because I've always been wary about talking on craft, because I'm known to be a little blunt and say what I feel. But thank you for giving me the opportunity, because I think, especially in the current scenario, the reason I feel these talks are important is that for people to know that the struggles that we makers go through to create these products, and for them to know the reality on a ground level, you know. So thanks for giving me a platform to talk about that.
No, definitely. I do hope you know, I wish we could record all these comments that are coming in on Instagram, where people are saying, brilliant session, they're thanking you, they're feeling inspired and motivated to go out and do things. I hope you're reading the comments on Zoom, because that's something that you can actually access.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, you can see that. Hemant says that it's been very inspiring. You're an inspiring, honest person with strong values, a craftrepreneur person, Karthik. But yes, a lot of people have actually really appreciated this conversation and have appreciated that you've been open. And I'm actually going to take another couple of minutes. And because we've got Gitanjali here and we started that, I want to ask both you and Gitanjali how you think younger entrepreneurs can, break into this field, or what is it that they can do or watch out for that matter. So Gitanjali, if I can ask you to unmute yourself and actually share your thoughts as well. But Karthik, if you'd like to start.
Well, I mean, I would say that come into it with an open mind, come into it with the idea of enjoying and exploring your creativity, and not necessarily come into it with the idea of making money. Because a lot of times we have seen people look at Varnam and said, oh, there is a market for this. And there have been examples, a lot of enterprises that have been started by designers in Channapatna and they have shut down within a year, right? And you have to really work in it for the love of it, for the passion of it. Don't look at crafts as a way of making money alone for yourself. I mean, for the artisans, obviously. I mean, it's a beautiful way to feed your soul, and the rewards will come in hopefully many years. And we've been working for a decade, right? And the rewards will come in at some point, but get into it because there is no other way to work. I mean, even in design schools, there are very few design schools that are focused on craft, except craft is limited to, oh, I want to do a good project, let me work in craft. We need more institutes like IICD, right? And we need institutes in the South as well that work on crafts and work on exploring and reviving a lot of crafts. And youngsters have that energy that they can really work literally, say, 18, 19-hour days in the field. So come in with the idea of enjoying and exploring yourself, especially in your formative years. There's nothing better than working in the craft.
Great. I was being greedy in asking that last question, but I'm really glad that I got the chance to do that. Gitanjali, unfortunately, has already left the meeting.
Okay.
But on that note, I do hope that a lot of people have been inspired and motivated today. And once again, thank you so much, Karthik, for being with us. And for our audience, I hope you can join us again next Sunday for another episode of 200 Sundays with 200 Million Artisans. We've got some more very exciting chats coming up, exploring different medium, different enterprises, different initiatives. Till then, on behalf of 200 Million Artisans, on behalf of Unplugged Talks, Viren and myself, thank you so much for joining us. A big thank you to our team at the back end, all the volunteers at 200 Million, and Siddhant, who handles all our tech and makes sure everything goes well. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see you again next week. Thanks, Karthik.
Thank you. Stay safe, everyone. Take care.